from Cedarburg Public Library Radio. You're tuned to the Steve Donoghue Show on CPL Radio, your one-stop daily source for Steve's take on the world of books. And now your host, the book critic who literally reads everything, Steve Donoghue.
Greetings, fellow patrons of the Cedarburg Public Library, and welcome back to the Steve Donoghue Show, where we discuss bookish news, views, and reviews as though times were simple and our hearts were young and gay. Our little chit-chat today digs up a dispute that has roiled in the more nerdy areas of the book chat world for decades. Namely, do audiobooks count as real reading? If you listen to the new Dostoevsky biography, or the latest piece of contemporary literary fiction about upper-middle-class Connecticut divorce, if you get the who, what, and wherefore via an audio file rather than via reading silently while turning pages or thumbing screens, does it count as a book you've read? Those of you who were brought up in the 20th century may find this question puzzling, since the answer is obviously no. No, a book you've listened to is not a book you've read. It is, instead, a book you've listened to. The two things aren't the same. If they were the same thing, they would be the same thing. But those oldie McOlderson fellow patrons haven't reckoned with the monstrous, off-the-charts narcissism of the average 21st century native. In the 21st century, there are no obvious answers to obvious questions. The obvious thing is no longer, is this answer true? But rather, does somebody somewhere want this answer to be true? In the 21st century, if somebody wants something to be true, then it is true. And if you even slightly disagree, you are a bigot, a fascist, a Nazi, a cultural appropriator, and a ripe target for being canceled on social media and in real life. There will be hashtags. There will be lawsuits. There will be death threats. In the 21st century, everyone does indeed feel entitled to their own facts, and heaven help the poor benighted fool who tries to tell them otherwise. Nevertheless, listening to an audio file of a book is not, in fact, the same thing as reading a book, either on printed pages or on electronic screens. When you listen to an audiobook, you are having a mediated experience, with a third party, the narrator, almost entirely controlling the nature of that experience. A droning, inept narrator can erase the appeal of even the most inviting book. Slight regional or dialectical nuances can snag an old personal association that the listener might not even realize he has. The pacing, the intonation, the sounds of both the characters and the settings, all of these things in audio form are no longer in the province of the reader. Instead, they're dictated by the narrator, who often isn't even the book's author. While reading text with your eyes is an inherently silent, entirely solitary activity, listening to audiobooks is communal. And while reading text with your eyes is an entirely focused activity, you might read while you eat or even read while you walk down the sidewalk, but generally speaking, you're entirely absorbed in the task. Whereas no matter how audiobook fans may howl in objection, listening to audiobooks is absolutely designed to facilitate the very antithesis of reading, that is, multitasking. One big reason why audiobooks have exploded in popularity in the 21st century is the fact that the technology to deliver them easily and smoothly to their listeners has finally caught up with its one and only task. But another big reason, bigger in my opinion, why audiobooks have exploded in popularity is because they fit comfortably into the 21st century's cultural habit of multitasking. You read a book instead of doing X, Y, or Z. You listen to an audiobook while doing X, Y, or Z. And although the two things are obviously not the same, there's certainly no shame in the act of listening to audiobooks. Humans are storytelling animals, after all, and listening to somebody tell you stories can certainly cheer you up, especially in the year 2020, when we all desperately need cheering up. That emphasis is implied in the title of a new YouTube video called Why Reading is More Important Now Than Ever. The video is by a young man named John Fish, who started his YouTube channel in order to chronicle his matriculation to Harvard University. He's an affable figure online, and since his channel facilitated great heaping amounts of vicarious status symboling, He soon had nearly 1 million subscribers. Even though it only uploaded a few days ago, Why Reading is More Important Now Than Ever has already racked up well over 100,000 views. In the video, he makes some very sound points. He notes that the social media that engages so much of our time in these days of endless quarantine is largely composed of many small activities designed to be engaged more or less simultaneously. Having all these little activities running at the same time requires us to get very good at what John Fish calls context switching. You bounce from one small activity to another, maintaining the thread, the momentum of each as your brain makes the rounds. But there are some things, John Fish points out, that require prolonged focus, and he looks right at the camera and says that in his experience, the single best activity for enhancing this kind of long-form concentration is reading. Now, most of what John Fish says in this video must be distrusted. He is, after all, a paid pitchman for a service called Audible, with which many of you will already be familiar. They're an online audio bookstore, owned by Amazon, of course, and John Fish has been their paid, on YouTube the word is sponsored, salesman for years now. He rounds off his hymn of praise to reading by pitching Audible, saying that he, for instance, listens to audiobooks on his way to his office every day. He even includes some helpful B-roll footage of himself, earpods in place, looking pensive on a city bus. Obviously, this example gives the lie to his whole opening monologue. When you're taking the bus to your office, you are by definition not engaging in long-form, dedicated concentration. You're multitasking. You're doing exactly what audiobooks want you to do. Now, John Fish may have made his video because his paymasters told him to, but I think it's important to note that his main points are once again correct. All that context switching is essential for life in the 21st century, and there's nothing wrong with that. We live in the age of multitasking, and multitasking certainly has its benefits. But that long-form concentration is also essential, maybe more so now than ever, just like his video title says. I realize I'm preaching to the choir on this point, but given the fact that the U.S. is staring down the barrel of cold and flu season and the almost certain reality of more and stricter COVID lockdowns, I thought it was worth stressing again. Set aside a chunk of time for uninterrupted silent reading every day. Your brain will thank you. And on that note, fellow patrons, I'll sign off for now and wish you all a very good bookish day.
The Steve Donoghue Show is a production of CPL Radio, a service of the Cedarburg Public Library located in Cedarburg, Wisconsin.